Bring in show music, please.
Hi, I'm CNBC producer Katie Kramer. Today on Squawk Pod. Senator Elizabeth Warren taking on the big banks and now telling our Federal Reserve Chair to do his job.
Jay Powell turns around and seems to be undercutting exactly what the Vice Chair for Supervision is doing. And I want to understand why. And I want to understand if it is related to the fact that Jay Powell has had multiple meetings with Jamie Dimon and with other big bankers.
And legislating against social media's harm to kids. Dr. Scott Gottlieb on the effort and the road ahead.
We all know social media is harming youth, but the harm isn't so direct, and the scientific evidence right now I don't think meets the threshold that they had with respect to alcohol and tobacco.
Plus, today's other big stories, like the Apple Pay plan, AI's big losers, and revenge porn, the deep fakes causing a stir on Capitol Hill and beyond.
I don't want it to happen to me. I don't think anyone, right? Nobody needs to see that.
It's Tuesday, June 18th, 2024. Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Becky by in 3, 2, 1. Cue it, please.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We're live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick along with Joe Kernen. Andrew is off today. Say that 3 times fast.
Apple
Play platform.
Apple Pay platform.
Apple Play platform.
See, you can't. You can't even say it once.
Apple Pay platform.
It is hard. Yeah, I messed it up.
All right.
The Wall Street Journal reports that several high-profile candidates have turned down the chance to run Boeing, like a hot potato. The report says that GE Aerospace CEO Larry Culp declined Boeing's request just to even consider the position.
He's in a brand new. He finally got to the place he wanted to be.
Yeah, but
GE
Boeing.
Aerospace.
Boeing. Get to run Boeing?
Yeah, but if you talk to Larry, he has really worked hard to get to this place. He's got the company humming. He's doing what he wants to do with the team he wants to be doing it with.
Maybe it's like
He was lured back into GE.
Might be like Danny Hurley. Likes where he is, win 3 straight. There's reasons. But it's a preeminent position to be CEO of Boeing. And also just a board member doesn't even want it. David Gitlin also reportedly declined an approach. And in other hiring news, The Hollywood Reporter says that Warner Brothers Discovery CEO David Zaslav has hired former White House press secretary Robert Gibbs to lead his communications division. He was President Obama's press secretary from 2009 to 2011, later served as global chief communications officer at Mickey D's, McDonald's. The previous head of comms at Warner Brothers, Nathaniel Brown, stepped down at the beginning of this year.
Online education company Chegg announcing that it will cut its workforce by 23% and close 2 offices outside of the United States. The stock has a tiny market capitalization right now, around $320 million, but it is notable because the company is a continued and clear victim of AI. It's down 90%, that stock, since ChatGPT was unveiled back in November of 2022. Now, you may remember in May of last year, the company's CEO at the time gave the first indication that ChatGPT was killing its business. This is a company that charges people to help with online learning. The CEO who made those comments stepped aside at the beginning of this month. And again, this is something that ChatGPT seems to have taken over completely. This was teaching you how to study, teaching you how to learn on some of these things. Now you can get the answers, even have papers written for you by ChatGPT.
Yeah. So there's a stock that has been affected by AI.
Yeah.
It's going to be those too. Not everything's going to, we keep looking for winners.
Look for the losers.
Got one, NVIDIA, a couple others, but there will be plenty of losers. Apple says it stopped issuing loans through the Apple Pay Later program. It's buy now, pay later deal that launched last year. The company said it will start allowing installment loans, though, later this year in its Apple Pay checkout process through third-party companies. And that includes buy now, pay later company Affirm, as well as credit card and debit card issuers. As a result, Apple will no longer handle credit checks and loan decisions for people who applied to pay later in the iPhone wallet app. It'd be nice not to have to deal with that.
Apple Pay plan.
Oh, I did it. I did it?
No, they took it out. They didn't make you say it at all.
Yeah, Apple Pay plan. No, I got it.
We got it now.
I got it.
I may have it.
Apple Pay plan.
Apple Pay plan.
But okay. A new bipartisan bill being released today that seeks to hold tech companies accountable for a growing trend of creating deepfake revenge porn, which I'm not really exactly sure what we're talking about. Emily Wilkins joins us now with it. It sounds horrible. I don't want it to happen to anyone I know, Emily, but tell us about it.
Yeah, this is certainly something no one wants to have happen to them, but there has been a boom in basically AI-generated images. They take the faces of real people, and then they put them on deepfake nude images. So it's your face, but it's a photo you never took, absolutely at all. And now a new bipartisan bill is seeking to push back not only on those who create and post those images, but also on social media sites and websites where they might appear. CNBC got an exclusive look at the bill. It would require social media companies to remove images within 48 hours of a victim requesting them to be taken down. The bill would also criminalize publishing or threatening to publish realistic images and be enforced by the FTC. Now, new apps have made it easier than ever to generate fake pornographic images. In 2023, deepfake pornography videos increased 464%. Now, states have already started to take action, including Texas, where students have used AI generation apps to bully and harass classmates with these deepfakes. Texas and other states have criminalized non-consensual AI deepfake porn. But the bill's sponsor, Senator Ted Cruz, said in a statement that a federal standard is needed to create a level playing field and to put responsibility on the websites to have in place procedures to remove the images and to empower all victims. Now, interestingly enough, Cruz's bill isn't the only one to address these deepfakes. Senators Dick Durbin and Lindsey Graham brought a different bipartisan bill to the Senate floor last week. Now, the bills do differ in scope, a little bit in angle, but there is an agreement that these deepfakes do need to be addressed before they become even more common, and we'll be, of course, keeping a very close eye on what Congress decides to do. Joe?
Okay, Emily, appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah.
I mean, it's a crazy situation. Even if they get these federal guidelines on this or federal rules on this, for it to be up 48 hours, the damage is already done. There have been stories where kids in school, something gets sent around, and instantaneously people look at them differently, even when they know that it's not fake, them, right? And it's not them. It's a crazy situation. I wonder
if over time it's like, that's stupid. You know what I mean?
You would think people would say that now, but they don't. They inherently,
And like we've talked before, I mean, the difference between one nude body and another, it doesn't really matter. It could be you, maybe it's not you.
Right.
It's
We've
just
seen
putting
bad fakes before, but if they can make it really good.
But, well, how do you know? It's like, it's probably not that much different. You know what I mean? You find, yeah, that's what I said. I don't want it to happen to me. I don't think anyone would want it to happen to me, right? You don't want, nobody needs to see that.
I think we're all on the same boat when it comes to that.
Yeah, I think so. So you agree with me on that? Thank you.
Cheese will be next.
Still to come on Squawk Pod, Senator Elizabeth Warren, who's taking on Fed Chair Jay Powell and the big banks.
Giant banks are no longer the banks that are doing lots of home mortgage lending. That's done by our community banks, it's done by our regional banks, it's done outside the banking system now.
The community banks and regional banks are the ones that got in trouble. That's where the big collapses came from.
A spirited discussion right after this. Welcome back to Squawk Pod, today with Joe Kernen and Becky Quick. Here's Becky.
In a letter out this morning, Senator Elizabeth Warren is questioning the Fed about closed-door conversations with J.P. Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon, advocating for slashing bank capital requirements in half. In the letter, Senator Warren writes, "It now appears that you are directly doing the bank industry's bidding, rewarding them for their extensive personal lobbying of you." Senator Elizabeth Warren joins us this morning, and she has more on her stance on this. Senator, welcome. What do you think the problem is here?
Look, the problem is that just last year, we saw the second, third, and fourth largest bank failures in the history of the United States. There is an effort underway that has been underway for years now to increase the capital standards, not across the board for all the banks, but for that tiny sliver at the top, probably somewhere in the range of 5 or 6 banks. Now, those banks don't want to have to increase their capital standards because it means they have to hold a little money back so that they're a little safer, a little more secure, and so that American taxpayers won't be called on to bail them out again. Back when the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, was talking to us last year about the bank failures, he admitted that we needed stronger capital reserve requirements.
The main responsibility I take is to learn the right lessons from this and to undertake to address them so we don't have a situation like this where we had unexpectedly a large bank fail and spread contagion into the banking system.
And he has made the point repeatedly when he's come in front of Congress, when I've questioned him, that we have a vice chair for supervision, that's Michael Barr, and that Jerome Powell, as chair, would support the vice chair as the vice chair developed rules for stronger capital standards. The vice chair is doing that, and it appears that the chair, Jerome Powell, is trying to undercut him. In other words, doing the bidding of that handful of giant banks who would like to be able to gamble all of their money, and if things go wrong, have the taxpayers pick up the slack.
All right, Senator Warren, let's run through a few of those points. That's a lot of stuff to dig through. First of all, you mentioned the big bank failures that we've had recently. That is true. We have had the biggest bank failures, but it has not been the taxpayers that have bailed them out. It has all been borne by the FDIC. It raised special assessments on all those biggest banks that you talked about. So they were the ones who have been doing the bailing out when it comes to this. Second of all, these big banks have pushed back, and their side of things has been that if we are not allowed to use that capital, it is capital that will not be going out to do things like make loans for houses, make loans for small businesses, make sure that the American public has access to that money, and that we will become less competitive relative to other big countries.
So, let me unpack what you've just said. The idea that we say it's fine for the FDIC to have to pick up, $12, $15 billion in losses because of those bank failures, we shouldn't worry about it. And notice, by the way, that J.P. Morgan Chase, that bought one of those big banks, managed to book a more than $2 billion gain from doing its own government-supported rescue of one of those failing banks. Look, the whole idea is to make the banking system more stable. And I don't know about you, but I still remember in 2008 when the American taxpayer had to sign up to be on the line for $700 billion in bailout money for those giant financial institutions.
But it wasn't the giant financial institutions that have gone bankrupt. You're right.
And that the Fed opened its window and let money go out over
but I don't think
and
we should
over
I don't think
over.
we should compare to what's
So
happening right now to
really
what happened during the
important.
Great Recession, during the Great.
That's what everybody says. Let's not worry about the bad times during the good times. The banks are highly profitable right now. They have booked enormous profits. And if they had to put aside just a little bit, then they would be safer. That's the idea behind it. And do keep in mind that these giant banks are no longer the banks that are doing lots of home mortgage lending. That's done by our community banks, it's done by our regional banks, it's done outside the banking system now.
The community banks and regional banks are the ones that got in trouble. That's where the big collapses came from.
Take a look at who it is that's doing the home mortgage lending.
Let's take a look at who was doing the financial collapses, though, too.
The banks are making the argument that somehow they won't be able to do a kind of lending that they're only doing a tiny portion of right now. The way I see this is we have a vice chair for supervision. Jerome Powell has testified to this multiple times. He is the expert on bank capital requirements. He is trying to devise those capital requirements. He is getting hit by lobbying by a handful of giant banks. And now it appears, and I've written a letter to ask about this, that Jerome Powell is also joining the lobbying. Jerome Powell said in open testimony in front of the United States Senate Banking Committee that he would support the vice chair for supervision. He did that back when the vice chair was Randy Quarles and very much in the corner of the big banks. Now that it's someone who's taking a little tougher look at those banks, suddenly it appears that the chair of the Federal Reserve is changing his tune. Look, either he really believes in supporting the vice chair or he doesn't. But it is not the job of Chairman Powell to get out and lobby on behalf of a handful of banks so that they can be even more profitable by pushing more risk into the rest of the system.
Senator, my biggest problem, I think, with what you're saying is questioning Jay Powell's credibility or his commitment on what he's doing with these things to suggest that he's been bought and paid for by the banks.
All I can do is compare what he said in testimony in front of the committee I'm on in answers to questions to me in public, and how he has now turned around and appears to be changing
with a
his
different,
tune.
just like Keynes said, when the facts change, you may change your opinion to fit them.
And I would like for him to clarify his position on this.
But
he's
are
not
you
there
suggesting
to
that
lobby
he
on
has
behalf
been
of a handful of giant banks?
But are you suggesting that his opinion has been drawn up
for the
because of these
safety and the
banks?
security
I'm sorry, I'll let you
of the
talk
rest
first, and then
of
you can listen to me.
America?
I'll let you talk first, and then you can listen to me. We shouldn't talk over each other. Go ahead.
We shouldn't. Go ahead. You're the one who interrupted.
Okay, Senator, let me just ask, are you suggesting that Jay Powell is a person who has been totally swayed by the banks on this? Or what? I mean, it sounds like you are. Am I wrong to make that assumption?
I'm suggesting that Jay Powell testified in front of the banking committee multiple times that he would be guided by the vice chair of supervision on decisions around capital requirements. He did that for years when Randy Quarles was the vice chair for supervision. I didn't like the direction Randy Quarles went because I thought he was too much in the pocket of the banks, but so be it. That's what Jay Powell said was his approach. He thought it was the right thing to do. Plus, he said that's the structure of the Fed. We have exactly one place in the Fed where there's one person who is specifically charged by statute with developing the expertise and developing the rules on things like capital standards, and that's the vice chair for supervision. And then Jay Powell turns around and seems to be undercutting exactly what the vice chair for supervision is doing. And I want to understand why. And I want to understand if it is related to the fact that Jay Powell has had multiple meetings with Jamie Dimon and with other big bankers. It's not the job of Jay Powell to carry water for the biggest banks in this country. It is the job of the chairman of the Fed to watch out for the security and safety of the whole system. And that is specifically on the question of capital reserve requirements, the job of the vice chair. So I have written a letter to Jay Powell asking him, would he please clarify what on earth he's doing here?
Okay, why don't we talk about some other issues that have come up and that you've weighed in on recently. You've got a huge focus on what's going to be happening with taxes. We have heard from both President Biden and former President Trump recently about what their plans would be for taxes. Obviously, it's a very different outlook on either side. You've been rallying senators, Democratic senators, to say they need to hold the firm line here.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. So, look, we've reached a point in America where the American people have said this just isn't fair anymore, that someone like Jeff Bezos pays taxes at a lower rate than a Boston public school teacher. And so what the American people want to see is that we raise taxes on billionaires, billionaire corporations, and that we fund the IRS so that they can actually make the tax cheats pay what they owe. That's what Joe Biden is running for. It's popular, and the rest of the Democrats really need to have his back. And I think that's what we're going to do. That's why Joe Biden's going to win.
Former President Trump, when he addressed the Business Roundtable, was that this week or last week? They all seem to run together at this point. I think it was late last week. Suggested that he would be taking the tax rate down to 20%. Obviously, that's at loggerheads with what the Democrats would like to have happen here. It's all going to depend on who actually wins not only the White House, but who wins the Senate in these elections coming up.
Yeah.
Where do you think things stand?
Look, I want to say, because I do think this is one of the places that is the clearest contrast. Basically, what Donald Trump has done, you're right, he went in front of the business roundtable. He's gone to his wealthy donors, and he has put the American tax system on the auction block. He said, if you will give Donald Trump millions and millions of dollars in order to wage his campaign, that in return for that, he has described it as he will give first-class tax cuts to the richest Americans and to the biggest corporations. That's not something the American people support. And when I say the American people, I'm not just talking here about Democrats. Look, what we've got right now is that 80% of American people, that's Democrats, Republicans, and independents, want to see us raise taxes on the richest corporations and the richest Americans. And that includes about 2/3 of Republicans who want to see that. Part of the reason we need to do that is fairness. And part of the reason we need to do that is this is how we pay for the programs we need in America. We really want to see more investment in infrastructure. Joe Biden and the Democrats have gotten through one of the biggest bipartisan infrastructure packages ever. But we need to do more for our transportation system. We need to do more for our water and sewage systems. Not very sexy, but very important. In addition to that, we need to be making investments in things like childcare. And to do that, we need the revenues. So it's really important that we talk about making sure that the system is a little fairer and that the burden not all be carried by working class Americans, by middle class Americans, but those at the very, very top also have to pay their fair share in taxes.
Just normal W-2 earners in the 1% or top 10%. Senator, it's a very progressive system. And in terms of outlays, we're now spending 23.1% of GDP on all these services you're talking about. Would you commit to any new revenue earned being earmarked for debt reduction, since we're at unsustainable levels right now on our total debt? It's 106%. It's by 2030, it's going to be crowding out almost anything we're trying to do. So let's say you do get your tax increases on all these fat cats. Would you commit to putting that towards deficit reduction instead of just spending? Let's raise more and tax and spend. Does it seem like it's working well for us right now just to keep taxing and spending more and more? We're not getting anywhere.
I understand that that's how it usually gets framed and how you want to frame it. But do keep in mind why we have such a severe deficit problem. And it's because we've done tax cuts that have just reduced our revenue sharply. So, for example, the Congressional Budget Office was saying that it appeared that where we were in the early aughts was that the amount of revenue coming in and the amount of expenditures going out looked about in balance until the Bush tax cuts became permanent. And once those Bush tax cuts became permanent, what happens is the deficit goes right through the roof. What did Donald Trump's tax cuts also do? They pushed the deficit up even higher. So part of what we've got to do is we got to get our revenue back in balance with our expenditures, but we also at the same time have to think about the things that we do need to spend money on in this country. Look what the investments in infrastructure are already doing for our country. I don't know about you, but back in Massachusetts, for example, we've got 2 bridges that go out to Cape Cod. Those bridges were built by the Army Corps of Engineers. They had a 50-year lifespan. That sounds reasonable. The problem is they were built 90 years ago. They were built to carry a modest amount of traffic. Now they carry literally hundreds of millions of trips across those bridges. And it is the only way to access by car or by bicycle or by foot to be able to access Cape Cod. This is a piece of infrastructure we desperately need in this country. If we'd replaced it 40 years ago, it would have cost us a whole lot less. Now we're looking at a $2 billion ticket for each of those 2 bridges. We've got to put the money in for our infrastructure. Otherwise, the country simply doesn't run. How is it that other nations have upgraded transit? How is it that other nations have upgraded their water systems? And here in the United States, we have a transit system that's the butt of jokes. We need to make those investments. Yes, we need to bring down the national debt. We also need to make investments. We need to do both of those things. And we can't do it if we're letting people like Jeff Bezos say, you know what? He can take trips into outer space. He can buy the biggest yacht in the world, but somehow he doesn't have any W-2 income, and therefore he doesn't really have to pay, at a higher tax rate than a Boston public school teacher. It's
Senator
not
Warren,
right,
I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're actually out of time in the
country.
program. Thank you for joining us.
Coming up next on Squawk Pod, labeling the danger of social media on children. Former head of the FDA, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, weighs in on the effort and how it compares to other strategies of wrangling social harm.
There were a lot of online sales of illegal opioids that we've got the social media sites to take down, but we did it by meeting with them, trying to come up with a list of best practices that they'd all follow. That was a much better framework to work within.
This is Squawk Pod.
Stand by, Joe. His mic, cue.
You're watching Squawk Box on CNBC. I'm Joe Kernen along with Becky Quick. Andrew's off today. Shares of Merck a little bit higher this morning, up 1%, 1.25%. The FDA approved the company's new vaccine designed to protect adults from a bacteria that can cause serious illnesses, including pneumonia. It's a pneumococcal 21-valent conjugate vaccine.
You can say that, but we can't say
I can say that, but I can't say Apple Pay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, in a new op-ed, Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy emphasized a need for action against the dangers that social media poses to children, advocating for Congress to mandate warning labels on these apps similar to those that are on cigarettes and alcohol. Joining us right now is Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He is former commissioner of the FDA. He's now a CNBC contributor and a board member of Illumina and Pfizer. And Dr. Gottlieb, it's great to see you.
Thanks a lot.
We talked about this yesterday because it certainly is something that is getting attention. Do you think it'll be effective? Do you think it'll pass? Because Congress has to approve it before they can even do this.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to pass. There's a high bar to compelled speech, forcing companies to engage in certain speech. And typically when the Surgeon General's issued warnings in the past, there had to be a substantial risk of a significant public health harm. I don't know that this meets that threshold because we all know social media is harming youth, but the harm isn't so direct, and the scientific evidence right now I don't think meets the threshold that they had with respect to alcohol and tobacco. Well, I think it's more diffuse. I just don't think they have the body of evidence to support this, and the companies are going to push back. That said, I think he's drawing a lot of important attention to this. He's really galvanized focus on this problem. It's very clearly a problem. There's a lot of literature right now showing the causal relationship between overuse of social media and mental health harms in children.
I mean, that would be my point. I don't know how effective a label is anyway, but raising awareness, getting this talked about. Joe and I talked yesterday about how social media has been around for 20 years, literally 20 years, and Congress can't agree to do anything to protect children in any way, shape, or form. It seems like the most bizarre set of circumstances.
Yeah, look, I think this is where he can provide a lot of leadership, and has, quite frankly, trying to come up with a set of best practices for the social sites to follow. If you look at something like Facebook, for example, Facebook Messenger, Instagram, across their entire platform, they've implemented more controls, tweaking their algorithms to make sure children aren't seeing inappropriate content, restricting advertising with respect to Facebook messaging app, also giving parents more parental controls over what the kids do online, who they're messaging with, and the ability to review messages. Not every site's doing that. So I think where the Surgeon General can provide a lot of leadership is trying to come up with sort of a Bill of Rights, if you will, best practices. And then Congress may come in and legislate that. That's what we did at FDA when I was there, when we wanted to get the social media sites to start restricting advertising to kids related to vaping and also opioid ads. There were a lot of online sales of illegal opioids that we've got the social media sites to take down, but we did it by meeting with them, trying to come up with a list of best practices that they'd all follow. That was a much better framework to work within. compelled speech.
It reminds me a little of when you were the head of the FDA and that vaping thing that you did do. I mean, it brought awareness and attention, and you really cracked down on things. You took the leadership on that.
And we got the sites to restrict the advertising to children, which was a big problem. There were messages being targeted to kids about vaping, some of it quite deliberate if you look at a company like Juul. And the sites worked with us on that. I don't think, we didn't have direct regulatory authority. There was nothing we could directly do. But by drawing attention to the problem, bringing them in, we convened a series of roundtables. They agreed to a set of standards that they ultimately adhered to. I think that's what you can do here. Would have a much more practical effect. Now, what the Surgeon General did yesterday, I think, is going to draw more attention to this. It's a sort of a splashy event. And so maybe there will be some follow-up with those kinds of practical steps. That's ultimately, I think, where he can operate. And then if he does come up with a good set of standards for the sites to follow, Congress may come in and look to legislate some of that. But the issue of compelling companies to put a warning on products, which is compelled speech protected by the First Amendment, we tried to do that at FDA in certain instances where we wanted companies to issue, for example, corrective messages related to drug side effects where they might have not adhered to promotional standards. And, the courts generally afford pretty broad latitude to companies in their First Amendment protected speech.
I don't even know how effective the labels are anyway. I don't know anybody who looks at it, goes to buy a pack of cigarettes and says, oh, the warning's in here, I better not do it. But the general awareness, I think, is helpful. And
I think that's right.
You're talking about it.
And there's also the issue of giving parents more control is important. Not every site's doing it. You look at Snapchat, for example, which my kids use purposely because the messages are erased. There's tools you can buy, things like a program called Bark, which you can download onto your kid's phone. It's a hardware and a software device that gives you a lot of functionality to see not only who they're interacting with, but what those messages are saying. So you can be prompted when messages have inappropriate content in it. Ultimately, parents need to get engaged here. I don't think we can put the entire onus on the social media sites, but they can tweak the algorithms to try to better define what kids are seeing.
Scott, one of my favorite things to do with you is to ask our own medical advice questions. We do it constantly because we know you well enough. You walked in, you'd been listening earlier, and you heard Joe saying he's taking melatonin. Just for news you can use for people at home, what's a safe level of melatonin?
The Z-Quil 2 gummies contains 6 milligrams of melatonin.
Right. So we were talking.
So if I take 3, that's 9 milligrams, which you said was about right.
Right. So when I came out, I said 10 milligrams would be the. I asked you how much you were taking, and so 10 milligrams would be the upper limit.
So this is 9.
Yeah. And if you want, there is a prescription form. I think it's generic now called Reserum. It's a prescription form of melatonin that hits the receptor in a more robust fashion. So if melatonin works for you for sleep, that's also a prescription.
So it doesn't work for everyone.
Melatonin, that's true. I hear.
No, I'm asking you, so it doesn't work for you.
I've talked to people. Look, it's anecdotal, and there is some data on this. I don't think it works for everyone. I don't think any of these sleep aids work for everyone. And certain sleep aids, some people have more of an overhang the next day. You need to get more
but not
hours of sleep.
Melatonin, I don't.
Melatonin is more short acting, so it's probably not going to give you the same.
I've never.
One thing I will say, it
I don't
does
need
counteract with some medications. So talk to your pharmacist or your doctor before you just start popping them. No, seriously, it counteracts with some medications.
Even melatonin, natural melatonin.
Melatonin does, yeah.
Yeah, I don't need it. I do it because it does make you feel. It's kind of like self-medicating, which I did in college quite a bit, and I like to feel the drowsiness of it, sort of.
Well, look, it's known. It's like I said.
I've tried that. It gets all sticky.
There's a prescription formulation of melatonin, so it's known to work as a sleep aid.
Yeah.
In the dietary supplements, you're getting variable dosage. It might not be hitting the receptor in the same action, so there is some variability across the products. But 10 milligrams would be the upper limit of what I would.
The big worry wart. You could have told me about the frickin' vaccine, but you didn't. No, I'm kidding.
Dr. Gottlieb, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
We appreciate it.
Coming up, I loved my messenger RNA. I still don't. I think it saved our bacon, did it not? Those vaccines. I think it was very helpful.
It's still effective.
Yeah.
That's Squawk Pod for today. Thanks for listening. Tomorrow, the U.S. stock markets are closed to mark the Juneteenth holiday, but check your feed for a bonus podcast early in the morning. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernen, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin.
Get the best of Squawk Box in our daily podcast. It's hard to fit it all in. It's seriously. And how long is the podcast?
As long as we want it to be.
Because it's impossible. It's a 3-hour show. It needs to be 3 hours if it's the best of.
Thanks, Joe. We'll meet you right back here tomorrow.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.